Endurance Junkie podcast, episode 23. Hey Junkie, how you doing? Welcome to another episode of the Endurance Junkie podcast, the show where I will be interviewing some of the fastest, smartest, and most inspiring people active in the endurance world today. Phil Collard was diagnosed as having cancer at the very young age of just 18 months. He was able to beat the cancer, but as a direct result, he has had two separate occasions in his life, once in his mid-teens and once in his early 30s, when he was told to prepare for life in a wheelchair. A genius of a surgeon, a total hip replacement, masses of determination, and the support of his wife and two sons later, Phil is now a qualified fitness instructor, a regular cyclist, swimmer, and triathlete who has recently finished Ironman Sweden. Phil, thanks for taking the time to chat here today. Now, for those of us who don't know you, can you tell us a bit about yourself and your sporting background?
Yeah, of course, yeah, absolutely. Right now, as you sort of find me, I'm a cyclist and triathlete, but my story from the beginning, if you like, is I had childhood cancer when I was very young, and that obviously led me to sort of a life which was perhaps slightly different to some of the other kids, the standard kind of route through life, as it were. I sort of pretty much spent my childhood in a state of hospital checkups and not really understanding what was going on, let alone being able to explain it to friends. I actually really found cycling initially in my early teens, sort of from 12, 13 onwards, and that was sort of my sport. And I remember saving up and buying sort of my dream bike when I was only about 13 years old. But then sadly what happened is at 15, some of the radiotherapy I'd had as a kid had left my hip with some damage that sort of hadn't really been spotted, or certainly couldn't have been spotted, and such was that when I had a bit of a growth spurt that you get at that kind of age, my hip basically broke itself. So I went from cycling to having pretty horrendous knee pain, which turned out to be referred pain from my hip. What then really happened is I went through months where people were pulling over me, doctors looking at my knees because I was complaining that my knee was hurting, and it took a while for them to realise that it was actually my hip. And in fact, it took so long that the initial prognosis, when they discovered what was wrong, is that not only was I not going to get on a bike again, but I wasn't even going to walk again. Now at 15, obviously that was devastating, really, from my point of view. But thankfully and mercifully, there was an operation to overcome that, and I learnt to walk again probably a week or so later. Then sort of back to sport, really. I recovered enough to be getting back on a bike, but by that point, my interest was in cycling was being replaced pretty slowly but steadfastly by an interest in motorsport. So I took up motorsport in kart racing. And had a lot of years enjoying sort of a lot of good success in karting and meeting some interesting people, and very exciting sport. And in my last year in the sport, I won a national championship, which was obviously huge to me. At the point I won that championship, even I could sort of tell that my motorsport days were starting to draw to an end. I'd had a lot of time in it, and I couldn't really see where I was going to go next with it. At the same time, I was married now, and it's not necessarily a married man's sport. So what I gave that up at the time. But to all intents and purposes, my hip from earlier on in my life, from sort of 10 years before, 12 years before, there was nothing wrong with that, and I think I even got back on a bike at that point. But then over the coming years, maybe 3 or 4 years after that, I think what was happening to my hip was so very, very slow that I didn't even notice it. And that might sound difficult for yourself and for people listening to this to understand, but I really didn't get what was happening to my hip. And it got to a point where I tried to get back into a kart on a holiday, and I couldn't sit in it. My leg simply wouldn't flex and wouldn't bend around the shape that it needed to get into. And it was quite an emotional moment, actually, where I suddenly realised that this thing that I'd spent years doing, I couldn't do. and I couldn't even sit in one. So I got back from holiday and realised, of course, that for some reason the operation I'd had back at the age of 15 to recover my ability to walk had clearly started to go wrong. And I threw a lot of money at chiropractic treatment and gyms and keeping fit. But very steadily, my ability to walk and certainly my ability to ride a bike disappeared. And even it's bizarre, but I even had a list of things I'd love to be able to do, and on that list was sit down in a chair and lie down without having to contort myself around the way that my hip was making my leg basically fixed. And I subsequently discovered that my hip had actually fused. Such was the sort of severity of the arthritis that it had developed in it. Now, at this point, but sort of 2007, I became a dad. My wife and I, we had a little boy, and by the time he was 1, I simply couldn't keep up with him. He was moving faster than I could, which probably isn't the thing that any dad wants to have on his plate. And of course, it was distressing from my point of view. My leg by now, I was even struggling to drive my car, which was my job. So I knew what the magic bullet was, though. I knew to go to a hospital and get a hip replacement. Basically, I knew to go and ask for one outright. So I did that, and then at that point, for the second time in my life, the doctor dropped the bombshell on me that I'd left it too late. And actually, at this point, I should not so much worry about walking again or driving a car, but more probably looking at a life in a wheelchair. And I couldn't allow myself to be the dad, the dad of a boy, and the one who was in a wheelchair. I knew that would define my little boy, and at the same time, I knew that that's something I couldn't handle, and I certainly wasn't about to accept. As it happened, I knew a very good hip surgeon, a top class hip surgeon. I knew him personally, so I approached him for a second opinion, and he's a bit of a maverick, and thankfully he decided that I was a bit of a project to him, I think, and we sat down and we chatted and decided that a hip replacement was the way to go. And the rest really then is leads me into my triathlon years, I suppose. I soon overcame the hip replacement that I had. I remember telling the doctor at the time, the surgeon at the time, that whilst these things are supposed to last for 15, 20 years, that I would much rather it last for the shorter end of that, the 15-year period, but have a very active 15 years on it, rather than 20 years sitting on a sofa. And I remember even at that point thinking, but surely the idea of getting back on a bike is one step too far. I hadn't been able to even sit on a bike for years, and at this point I was now age 33, and I remember I even bet my wife that it simply wasn't going to be successful enough to even think about getting on a bike. This operation I was having might well enable me to walk again, but that was about as far as it was going to go. And then, slowly but surely, I stuck to all of the kind of advice I was being given on how to look after my hip and how to bring back strength to it. And then, lo and behold, I managed to get on a bike and I started taking up cycling again, which was incredible because it was something that I'd enjoyed so many years before and still absolutely love. Then one day, my wife came home from an evening out and said to me that the husband of one of her friends was doing a triathlon just a couple of weeks later, literally a couple of weeks later. Would I fancy doing it? I didn't even know what a triathlon was, quite honestly, at the time. I kind of had some vague idea that it involved swimming, biking and running, but I didn't really know anything about the distances. So, but I woke up the next morning still thinking about it, and I figured the fact that I was still thinking about it the next morning meant that maybe it was something that I'd like to do. So I picked up the phone to the chap in question, had a quick chat with him, jumped in a pool. This is about 4 years ago now. Jumped in a pool, realised I couldn't swim a length, so needed to do a bit of work on that. In 2 weeks, it was a sprint try, so it was about 16 lengths of the nearest pool. So I had 2 weeks to swim, to get from not really being able to swim a length to being able to swim 16. I had 2 weeks to get to being able to ride the 15 miles that I was expected to, and 2 weeks to be able to run 3 miles, having not run for, goodness, I don't know, 10 years probably. So that was a challenge, but I really enjoyed it. And I did it, and I completed it. And in actual fact, I remember crossing the line of that first try, with so much left in me at the end of it that actually it was almost embarrassing. I almost felt like I should have pushed myself harder, because I felt like I needed to hold so much back to be sure of finishing, and I'd held too much back. And that's the start of it, really. I carried on. I kept on going. I kept up with my cycling. I kept up with my swimming. Wouldn't have considered myself to be good in either of those three. Of course, the hip replacement was stopping me do the running. I wasn't training to run at all. Throughout all of my tries, I've only ever really run on the day of a triathlon, so I've sort of jumped off the bike and relied on my cardio fitness to get me round a run, because I'm sure my surgeon wouldn't be too chuffed if he thought I was training and running on my hip. And I carried on with my tries. I didn't even, quite honestly, I remember I bought a stopwatch with the Ironman logo on it, and I remember looking at that and just laughing. I would never have even imagined the idea of entering an Ironman. It was ludicrous. And then somebody on Twitter picked up on the fact that I do these triathlons, and said, "You do Ironman?" I think mainly because I think that was the only one he'd heard of. And of course, I should have said no. The idea of running a marathon was probably not the idea that I should have been thinking about. But as opposed to writing no, I put not yet, and that was enough really for me to think, actually perhaps I do deep down want to have a go at one of these.
Cool.
So yeah, I entered Sweden in around about 13-14 months ago.
Okay. When you first started with triathlons, you said you hadn't trained anything at all for your running, because I guess you didn't ask for your doctor's advice if this was a good idea. Because I mean, you go swimming and you go cycling, you both supported, by the water or by the bike, but I guess the running has a huge impact on the hip.
Yeah, well, no, I didn't, and that was perhaps not the most sensible thing to do. I didn't ask for his advice, because I kind of knew what that advice would be. But having said all of that, I'm a strong believer that I know my body, and I certainly wasn't about to do anything to it that was going to cause me pain. And if I'd started to hurt, then I would have stopped. And the one thing I did do, I would say, is I invested in a kind of a money no object, if you like, pair of running shoes. I immediately, within a couple of days of deciding to do this thing, I immediately went to a specialist running shop with the running analysis. I didn't ask the price. I just got fitted out for the very best and the most suitable pair of running shoes that they could fit me out with, and I didn't even know the price, quite honestly, until I looked at the receipt later on. So my approach to protecting my hip was a money no object kind of approach. But no, I wouldn't advise anybody to do this. But no, I didn't approach my surgeon because I know he would have said no.
Yeah. Yeah, and hopefully the 15 to 20 years will hold up, because I'm not sure if these have been tested for by triathletes, but hoping for you that they will last for 15.
I hope so. I mean, the one thing I would say is that I've been back obviously for a number of checkups since, and they've all of the X-rays that they've taken every time I've gone back. They've said to me they don't know what it is I'm doing, but whatever it is I'm doing, I should keep doing it because it's not showing any of the signs of wear that they would expect it to.
Okay.
So something I'm doing is right.
Yeah, I guess the impact does make the bones stronger, so I guess it'll definitely have an impact on the on the hip replacement as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, you entered Ironman Sweden.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you do some run training for that, or did you just run your marathon without training there as well?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, that's pretty much what I did. Yeah, I did about 2 or 3 3-mile runs. I ran an Olympic try. So what's that? 6-mile run. I did one of those, and I did one half marathon run about 6 weeks, I guess, before the Ironman. But no, that was it. That was the extent of my running. So I got off the bike in the Ironman on the day itself, and yeah, from that point on, I was pretty much in uncharted territory. Really, certainly hadn't run more than half marathon, and even then, I'd only run more than 3 miles once or twice. So no, I didn't train to run for that bit. No.
But how was the rest of your race?
Brilliant, yeah, really good. I went into it. One of the things I was saying in the run up to everybody that was asking me was that I couldn't afford to set myself a run target or an overall time target. Basically, what I needed to do was finish within the cutoff. That was my Ironman target. But what I was going to do is, I'm a naturally competitive kind of soul. What I was going to do is I was going to set myself a swim and a bike target. And if I hit both of those and then went on to finish, then that would be what would make me happy, because then that way I just knew that I wasn't going to be putting myself under too much pressure as soon as I was having to do the marathon. I knew that even if I walked the marathon, which for a large part of it I did, I knew that it wasn't going to bother me psychologically afterwards, as long as I finished and hit my swim and bike targets.
Yeah, and you did?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, absolutely. I beat my swim target by about 5 minutes, and I beat my bike target by 3/4 of an hour, actually. So I was probably overly cautious with my bike target.
Cool. Now, all this was pretty well documented on your blog.
Yeah.
Which you sort of turned into a book recently.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, absolutely. The story behind that's an odd one, really. I was always going to get it printed. Because I wanted something for myself. This was a big year for me. It was obviously a big achievement based on where I'd come from. I mean, I guess it's a big achievement for anybody, but for me in particular, I think it felt like a huge year. So I was always going to approach companies that print these blogs and present it to you in like a sort of as a way of remembering the year. And I'd looked at these things online, and there was a few online, and I'd even got to the point of getting quotes. And then suddenly I got quite a few messages, actually, from regular readers and people that had sort of passed through the blog and had a look at it over the previous 12 months. And a few of them said to me, make sure you tell me when you print this blog, because, I'll buy it. And they'd skip the very natural step of asking me whether I was even going to do that. They'd assume that I was. So I started to think, I wonder if this has got legs, since I want a printed copy of my own anyway. So I started looking into self-publishing it, and I thought, well, actually, the worst comes to the worst is there's only going to be one copy printed of this, and I'm going to have it, and I was going to do that anyway. The other end of the scale, other people could buy it and perhaps be inspired to take on their own challenges by it. So I did that, and yeah, I've had some really good receptions. Lots of people have bought it, and people I don't know as well, not just sort of family and friends. So yeah, it's great. It's great to be out there, and it's great for people great to think that people are reading it.
Yeah. And where can people get it? It's available on Amazon, I suppose?
It's on Amazon, yeah. Phil Collard, if you search Phil Collard, and then, hopefully on books and Kindle, that should come up straight away. But if not, the title of the book is On Days Like These. Basically, it's the kind of the preface to the book is my backstory in a few pages, just to sort of give context to the rest of it. And then the rest of the book is the series of blogs that I did. I guess I probably averaged weekly over the 12 months, where I go through my training and what I've done and what I've achieved, and some of the challenges I had, and there was obviously a lot of those through the 12 months. For instance, I couldn't open water swim to save my life until May. I think I had an occasion in May where I was so panicky that I was shouting for help, and that was just a few months before I was meant to do it all in the Baltic Sea. So the blog is basically a series of blogs, from training blogs through sort of blogs that are slightly more provoking of contemplation and thought about what we're doing with all this training and what it all means, and perhaps my views on training and so on. So it was written really for as much as anything for my own entertainment, but it's incredibly humbling that other people have found it interesting enough to read and interesting enough to buy as well.
Yeah, I'll definitely make sure to put the links in the show notes so people can get it.
Thank you.
I think if I'm correct, like half of the proceeds go to your charity that you run with
That's
your
exactly
wife,
right. Yeah, that's
Honeybones.
exactly right. Yeah, we set this charity up, my wife and I, again a little bit in conjunction with the surgeon, with Everett, who he approached me one day actually to perhaps work with his charity, and at the end of a very long conversation and very enjoyable evening around his house, it basically ended up saying that actually I could perhaps look to set my own up. Honeybones is the name of the charity, and my wife and I set this up to educate, support, and inspire other people with bone and joint conditions. Not as niche necessarily as mine, because mine's a fairly narrow set of circumstances that led to it. But really anybody who has bone and joint conditions, and you know, we want to offer help to those people, and also the support networks of those people, in terms of understanding what help there is out there, what you can do in terms of like rehabilitation as well as rehab. All of those things really. It's quite a wide scope, hopefully.
So yeah, cool. And where can people find out about Honeybones? Can they contribute in some way other than the book?
They can, yeah, absolutely. Honeybones, the website www.honeybones.org, and they can find out a little bit more about the actual objectives of the charity in a bit more detail as to what we're up to, a little bit more detail about the people behind it. Obviously myself and my wife included, but we're incredibly grateful to have the surgeon as a patron, the surgeon who did my hip as a patron, and also we've got a couple of great another patron rather is a Olympic 3-time I think Olympic downhill mountain biker, a chap called Ollie Beckinsale. And we've got some information on there as to what we're about and what we're trying to do, and there is a donate now button. Yeah, sure. So if anybody was kind enough to donate, there's an opportunity to do that on there.
All right, cool. Now, does it stop for you at Ironman Sweden, or do you have anything else planned for the future?
No, it doesn't stop for me at Ironman Sweden. I think realistically, I've accepted the fact that I probably ought not to do another Ironman. As much as I was absolutely blown away by Sweden, it was most amazing experience of my life. Really, it was incredible. I can't really bring myself to think I'd do another one. I think it was as big a risk as I want to take with my hip, but at the same time, I can't bring myself to think that it's the last time I'll experience that kind of thing. So what I'm looking to do next year is I'm doing a 70.3 in Austria, the ZLMC 70.3, yep. And I'm also focusing on other things as well. I've from having felt like I was going to drown in open water in just May, I've actually really developed a love for open water swimming. And there's an event in the UK, Bridge to Bridge in Henley, which is an 8-mile open water swim. Arranged very similar to like a cyclo-sportive in cycling terms, so kind of not a race, but it's important. We try and get as good a time as you can. So there's an 8-mile swim that I want to do there, and also I'd love to do John O'Groats to Land's End on a bike, which is again in UK terms sort of the holy grail really of long distance cycling, and I'd like to do that next year. So if you like, there's 3 kind of A races that I want to do next year, and none of them should take too much out of my hip, but all of them should still give me an outlet for this sort of urge I've got to challenge myself.
Yeah, somehow just stay away from the impact sports as much as possible.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think the 70.3 is, I can certainly feel myself wanting to do one of them a year, perhaps. I don't really think that'll do my hip too much damage, but I think that that my really long endurance stuff probably ought to stay in the pool or on a bike, or water rather, on a bike.
What about your son? Is he interested in the sports that you do? Does he want to follow in your footsteps?
I have 2 sons now.
Oh, okay.
Amazingly, and one of the second actually is named after the surgeon that did my hip, and both of them are into their own sort of the triathlon sort of range of sports as I am, and they both absolutely love their swimming and cycling and running, and both of them actually are shaping up to be better runners than I am. Certainly my oldest one, he's 7 now. He can cover a mile quicker than I can. So yeah, it's fantastic to see them, and I'd like to think that they've taken something from this last 12 months of watching me do what I've done and develop myself in the way that I have, and the idea that they might want to do one day, just incredible. I'd love that. It would be amazing.
Yeah, I guess it's a totally different story than it was 10 years ago for you now.
Oh, incredible! I mean, I can't even. There's no comparison.
Well, awesome. That's an amazing story. How can people get in touch with you if they want to?
Yeah, I'm on, as you know, I'm on Twitter at PI Collard, and that's probably the easiest way to get hold of me, to be honest, because I'm sort of always my Twitter's always on in the background. So yeah, at PI Collard.
All right, cool. I'll put that in the show notes definitely. Well, all right, Phil. Thanks very much for your time. It's been incredible. I hope people find it as inspiring as I do.
Oh, that's fine.
Anything else you want to plug?
No, that's it. I think the book is the main thing because the book is there really for Honeybones as much as anything else. But also, if one person can read that book and find it interesting and inspiring enough to get out there and take on their own challenge, doesn't have to be Ironman. It's a much wider thing than that. Then I'd be a very happy man.
All right, perfect. Thanks for your time, Phil.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed.